When you're scrolling through social media, you've probably seen videos with captions across the bottom. You've also probably seen them on TVs in a waiting room or on the bottom of your favorite news broadcast. Beyond allowing you to know what's happening in the video without everyone around you hearing it, these captions are a content lifeline to many individuals with auditory impairments. There are many ways to make content accessible: captions, alt text, audio descriptions, even the transcript that accompanies this podcast. They all help users enjoy digital content. Welcome to Season 2 of the Things You Didn't Know podcast. I'm Brandon Etheridge, and joining me today is Dr. Ed Youngblood. He's the Associate Director of Media Studies in the School of Communication and Journalism at Auburn University. He's also the co-director of the College of Liberal Arts Laboratory for Usability, Communication, Interaction, and Accessibility. His research focuses on web usability and specifically accessibility. Thank you so much for joining us for the podcast today, Dr. Youngblood.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're going to dive into your research in just a second, but I know the work that you do is very personal, and though you've been doing work in this field for years, it was an experience with your mother that really made this work hit home for you. Tell me about that.
Sure. I was already doing some work in accessibility, and my mom had a stroke about 10 years ago or so, about 10 or so years ago, and lost most of her vision. She still has some vision, but not a whole lot. And so it really encouraged me to think about it, and it's gotten me to kind of think about accessibility from some new perspectives.
You know, that really hits home for me. I was in high school when my dad had a stroke and lost the ability to use anything from his shoulders down. And one of the things that I noticed again and again is the number of things that really we take for granted as able-bodied individuals, that, you know, just little things that make life so much more challenging for those with a variety of different disabilities. So it really is, this work is so important to ensure that the assistive technologies that are out there, that the features that are out there, specifically in the digital environment, are able to be used effectively by those that need them. Now, you've investigated and worked with all sorts of groups that have a legal mandate to create accessible content, from websites for state voting offices to VA medical clinics and TV stations. Give us, if you will, just a quick state of the union when it comes to creators being aware of their accessibility mandate and the quality of accessible content that's currently out there in the wild, if you will.
Sure. As you mentioned, I've looked at a lot of different types of websites. I've done a lot of work looking at Alabama state and local government websites. I've looked at federal websites. A lot of it from the perspective of a combination of automated testing and then kind of digging through the code to see what was going on. And what I found, and what a lot of researchers have found, is that there are problems with accessibility. And some of the accessibility hooks can be kind of difficult to do, but a lot of the easy stuff isn't getting done. And that's what really kind of worries me. So when you're on a website, there should be alternative text that describes what's going on in an image. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it's not just that the text isn't really descriptive, it's that it's non-existent. And so what that means when somebody's using a screen reader that reads what's on the screen, they don't get that message. They don't get that information. And sometimes the information's really important. So it might be the only way they can get at the information on how to make an appointment at a clinic. It could be the map that shows where to go to vote. And so that's really a big deal. And there are a lot of other small things that you can do that make a lot of difference, like using headings correctly. And those often don't get done, or making sure that you've got good color contrast so that somebody with low vision or somebody who's colorblind can get to the content.
You know, I think understanding the requirements for captioning is really important, specifically when we're talking about video captioning for people to understand. So specifically, I want you to talk a little bit about what's required in the US, and then we have a lot of listeners outside of the country. So kind of compare and contrast the difference in what's expected and required in the US versus other countries around the world when it comes to video captioning.
That's correct. So the requirements vary depending on what's going on. If you're talking about online content or educational content, government content, you're supposed to provide captions. Where it gets interesting is when you start trying to figure out what's good captioning. In the U.S., from the FCC perspective, they're looking at accuracy, they're looking at placement. So where do the captions go on the screen? Are they obscuring information? Are they synchronous? Do they match up when somebody's talking? And are they complete? So if you're watching something like a newscast, do the captions cut off before the end of the video? Right? So do you get to the end of the video and the captions are still going and trying to keep up? And it can be really difficult to measure success using those FCC guidelines. Whereas from a broadcast perspective, Ofcom, which is kind of the British equivalent of the FCC, has really clear guidelines on what type of accuracy is expected. Canada has really clear guidelines on what kind of accuracy is expected and talks about how to go and calculate that. In the U.S., the guidelines are a little bit vaguer, but captions are really widely used, and a lot. It's important for people to understand it's not just people that can't hear that use captions. A lot of people, a lot of the caption users, if not most of the captions users in the U.S. and then they've studied in England as well, aren't actually deaf. It's convenience, or they'll use it because they're in the United States and they're watching something like the the English baking show, and they're trying to work around an accent.
You know, that's something we've seen a lot, specifically in the marketing space, people talking about is beyond the reason that, oh, it's the right thing to do. You know, so many people are consuming content, whether it's in a meeting, while their boss is talking, they can't listen to something at the
A
time, or
classroom.
in a classroom, exactly. You know, there's so many people that those captions is how they're watching the videos. So beyond just the reason you should do it, it's just smart otherwise in a business sense because there's so many people that are using those to watch videos. You know, obviously making accessible content, it takes more time. Like that, there's no way around that. It does take more time than just throwing content online without accessibility features. So, you know, I'd love to know from your work, have you seen any barriers to organizations creating the volume of content they might want to when they have to put these accessibility practices into place?
That's not one of the things I've dug into too much. I think, but one of the ways I think we can solve some of this is when we're teaching. So I taught web design for a long time, and one of the things I always pushed in my web design classes was that you've got to build accessibility into it from the very beginning, right? And one of the metaphors that I always used was trying to make a house accessible. So if you've got a building that was built in the 1950s and you're trying to bring it up to contemporary accessibility standards, that's really difficult, right? Because all your doorways are already constructed. Whereas if you're building a new building and you're paying attention to the accessibility guidelines, it's not that hard, right? Websites work the same way. If you pay attention to it when you're creating it, it's not really that hard to do the basics. With video content, it can be a little complicated for making captions and deciding what you're going to caption. And that's I think one of the biggest challenges for something like a movie is what sounds get captioned and what sounds don't. But for a lot of video, just having the text captioned works, right? And the social media companies, which is where you see a lot of discussion right now, because something like 80% of Facebook users watch video with the audio off. Facebook has made some pretty good captioning tools. YouTube has really good captioning tools built into it. It'll actually auto-generate your captions, and then you can go back in and edit them. So for just doing dialogue, it's not that bad. And in something like YouTube, once you create your captions, you can export them and bring them into whatever other platform you want. Uh, where we're missing the hooks for online material, particularly on something like YouTube, are audio descriptions, which is how you make video accessible to somebody who's blind. And I went to a great uh, Section 508 workshop online a couple weeks ago, and that was one of the challenges that like the National Park Service was facing. Is they've got the video with the audio description track, but there's not a way to toggle it on and off in YouTube. And so what they're having to do is put up two versions of the video, one with audio description and one without. But again, if you start thinking about this during the development process, it's not quite as bad, right? So if you're writing something like a PSA and you write the audio descriptions as you go, then it's not as bad as trying to come back and redo it.
And for people that aren't aware, audio descriptions are really, really neat. There are several shows on Netflix, actually, and I'm sure you know the name. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but I've seen a few of them. You can actually turn on the audio descriptions and listen to the shows in a way that somebody who has a visual impairment would have to use. And it's really neat to hear just kind of how all of that works together and plays together to create this TV show.
Yeah, the one I'd recommend people go in and listen to is Daredevil, which is one of the first shows that Netflix did with audio descriptions. If you're not familiar with Daredevil, it's about a blind superhero. So it made perfect sense that Netflix, after a little bit of pressure, put in audio descriptions. But if you listen to the show, it's like listening to really good old radio because of the way the narrators for the AD is worked in. And I watched the first two seasons of it without ever seeing it. I was working on a project and listened to it, and I wanted to learn more about audio descriptions. But yeah, audio descriptions are really fascinating, and I encourage people to go and listen to them and play around with a new way to get at material. So if you want Daredevil while you're driving, put on Netflix, turn on audio descriptions. Don't watch the video, right? We don't watch video while we drive, but you can certainly listen to it, and it's a whole new way to experience it.
So, the whole goal of this podcast is to provide really practical next steps or action items for our audience based on our amazing researchers, and this episode is no exception to that. But I want to take this and look at it from two different perspectives. Almost everyone these days is a content creator in one way or another. But I want to start with the business or government organizations or media companies. What should these organizations be doing? What should they be thinking about from the very top of the organization to the person pressing publish on an article or send on an email? When it comes to creating accessible content, what should these organizations be thinking about?
Sure. I think for on the social media platforms, which is where a lot of this is taking place, it's thinking about it as you're putting the content up. So when you post a picture in Facebook, Twitter, and most of the social media packages, you've got the ability to go and write a description of the image. Write a good description of the image. If it's got text, write what the text is. If it's think about what somebody needs from the image. You don't want to over describe. Usually with things you want to think about it in terms of a sentence or a few words. On more complicated things, you may need, like a graph, you may need to go and really think about how you're going to describe that information. But do it while you're putting it up. If you're doing a podcast, a lot of time you'll work from a script. I'm pretty sure you've got a script for at least part of this, right? So you can create a transcript pretty easily. I'm actually teaching a podcasting course this semester, and I've started putting up transcripts for all the audio lectures that I give. I do like 6 to 12 minute. If I remember to hang on to my script, it's really easy because I work straight from my script. I put that up, and the students have really enjoyed it. I've had a couple that I've had to go back to where, for one reason or the other, I couldn't find the Word file, and I've used something like otter.ai and put it up, and it was, I think, a 7 or 8 minute lecture. It was pretty short. You can do a few for free on Otter, and it generated the transcript. It took me about 7 minutes to just listen to it, fix a couple comma errors, correct a couple words, and then I had a transcript and could put it up. And while I don't have any students that rely on transcripts for accessibility, my students have it. And so I think with something like podcasting, it's not bad. Zoom actually will do some transcribing. There are a lot of ways to go and do a first draft of your transcript automated. For captioning, again, if you're working from a script, you've got some of the captions there. And you can go into something like YouTube, build out your captions, and then bring them into something like Facebook, so they sync. Facebook does have a decent captioning tool, though I like the one on YouTube better. There are also captioning and audio description services that you can use that aren't that expensive. And I will add, I mean, the reason we should caption and the reason we should do audio description, the reason we should make sites accessible is because it's the ethical thing to do. But in a lot of cases, it's also the legal thing to do. And it's a lot cheaper to go and pay to get your content captioned than to have a lawsuit. But again, you're also making your material a lot more available. There's a lot of NPR content I listen to that I enjoy, but sometimes I just want to go to the NPR site and just read the stories. And it's the same content, just in written form. You're giving your users more ways to consume the material. You've got the potential to spin it off into other types of content as well. So you can move from MP3 based content to text based content on a website or a blog. It makes your material more flexible. There was a great article written in the late 90s by a guy named Greg Vanderheiden who called Nomadicity, that talked about how building accessible products actually made them more flexible and more usable for everybody. And Dr. Vanderheiden helped write some of the Section 508 legislation uh, guidelines, and also helped develop some of the World Wide Web content, World Wide Web Consortium guidelines for accessibility as well.
So I think that's really great information. And most of that stuff is things that anyone can use, anyone that's posting online. But the second way I want to take this is focused on the everyday content creator, someone that's writing a blog or a YouTube channel, or just starting to use Instagram or a social platform. What are some things, and maybe we go the route of alt text because that might be a new term to some people. How do you write good alt text or create good audio descriptions? Give me the short and condensed version, if you will, that someone would need to know if they're just starting out.
Alt text, for the most part, aren't that difficult. Um, if you've got a picture of a family, like a family holding a child, tell them that you photograph image of a family holding their young child, and that's probably the information you want. The key is thinking about what information you want them to get out of the image. There are also times that you'll have images that really are just decorative. Maybe it's a little scroll thingy or something like that, and you can put an empty set of quotation marks in for the alt text, and the screen reader will skip it. So if it's something that's not important, you can do that. One of the nice things is that many of the platforms now are actually pushing accessibility. Facebook actually will try to go and fill in the gaps if you don't put alt text in, but they can only sort of do it. Um, there's an organization called Diagram that has a great free book on how to describe complex images. And for somebody who really wants to dig into it, that's a wonderful resource. For most people, though, they're not putting up really complicated things. Um, and so really it's just a matter of giving people a short, concise description of what the image is. Again, if you've got text in the image, so like a lot of the memes, you'll have a brief description of what the meme is, and then make sure you include what the text is. If you've got an image that's just text, just put the text there. On social media, you don't really have control over things like headings. But in a blog, you've got the ability to control headings. And so you want to make sure you use headings correctly. So your biggest heading is typically your H1 or your H2, and then you go sequentially down to H2, H3, and you kind of think about that for your heading sizes. Because when somebody who's using a screen reader accesses a web page, one of the ways they'll do it is they'll say, give me a list of all the headings on the web page. And the screen reader will read that off. And it's important that they're in order so that they can get that kind of sense of what the web page looks like. And it's the same way you and I would skim a web page, right? Would skim down, would look at the headings. So headings are really important. The other mistake that a lot of people make is when they link text. Because somebody who's using a screen reader may tell the screen reader, hey, I want a list of all the links on the web page. And if everything is click here, or here's a link, they've got no idea what that means. And so just writing linked text that is clear and makes sense is important. And again, that one's really easy to do. I'll add, from thinking about your users that are coming in who aren't using a screen reader, it's great for them too, because everybody's probably had the experience where you kind of skim down to see what links are in a web page, and everything says click here, and you're going, now you've got to go back and read the whole sentence. So using headings correctly, writing linked text that makes sense, and using the alt text, that's just a really good start. And for most people running a blog or something like that, that'll take care of most of it, particularly if they've been careful and are using a template that has a lot of the stuff built into it, a lot of the other stuff taken care of. For audio descriptions, the challenge is trying to describe what's going on with the screen, on screen, without giving too much information. That one's really hard to dive into without spending some time doing some reading on it. The great thing is there are free workshops out there that you can go to. And if somebody wants to get into it, and I don't remember where it is, but it's one of the universities in Hawaii, has a free, I think it's in Hawaii, has a free audio description course where you can volunteer to go and help do audio descriptions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Youngblood, for joining this episode of the podcast. Your research is really interesting, and I really look forward to how our listeners are able to take and implement these insights to create a more accessible digital environment. One shout out I want to give is, I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, the Lucia Lab here in the College of Liberal Arts that Dr. Youngblood is a co-director of. And if you're a company or an organization that wants to be more accessible, wants to create a more accessible website or more accessible digital content, that's what their lab specializes in, and they are always looking for clients to come and be a part of the work that they are doing and for them to be able to serve as part of the outreach mission of the university. So I really hope you will connect with them. The info and the link to their site can be found in the show notes on this podcast. For all of our listeners, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so that you can be notified each time one of our episodes drops. And make sure you hit that 5-star button. It helps us out more than you know. We'll see you next time on the Things You Didn't Know podcast.